Welcome to Stormwater Awareness Week. This is almost the end. It's Friday, glad that you are spending your Friday here with us at Stormwater Awareness Week. Hopefully you've enjoyed this week and it's been a good week of training. It's been informative. Yes, as Rebecca was saying, my name is Jonah Sonner. I'm a QSP in SciSec with WGR Southwest. I think a few of you have returned from earlier in the week, so welcome back if you were here for my first two workshops. This one is going to be focused more on construction, and I've taught stormwater BMP, construction BMP workshops before, and I wanted to do something a little bit different this time around. I figured instead of just talking about how something's supposed to be installed, or talking about the basic BMPs or what instances to use, or going over casket BMPs, I figured let's just get some good in the field examples. And so what I've decided is I've compiled a bunch of inspection photos from the past year, from the past stormwater year, and we're just going to look at some of the things that have happened and some of the jobs I've been on, some of the situations that have turned into non-compliant situations, and we're going to be talking about construction BMP implementation from that side. So if you have any questions, go ahead, you can put it in the chat. We'll have a little Q&A time at the end. But this is going to be more relaxed, more laid back. It's Friday after all, it's 3 o'clock. So enjoy, hopefully you'll enjoy some of these stories and these examples, and you'll get to learn something in a little bit different way. So here we go. Okay, so 21-22. Disclaimer here, these views are just my observations. This isn't any I don't have a source for this information, but this is just what I've observed, at least in the areas that I've worked in. Yeah, so 2020, 2021 and 2022, we noticed a bunch of different difficulties in construction. The first one was definitely economic challenges, gas prices going up, supply and demand issues. First it was plywood, then it was appliances or metal or screws or different things, and so projects kept getting delayed or having to wait for supply to catch back up with the demand. Even BMPs, I was on certain inspections saying, hey, you need to replace these BMPs or do this or do that, and they said, we've been trying to buy new BMPs for the past couple months, can't find any. Can't find anybody that's selling them right now. They're selling out. So economic challenges definitely had a role to play in this past year. And I work in the municipal field, if you haven't joined me before in my workshops. So I work as I guess I should have put this at the beginning, I work as a municipal QSP inspector, kind of as a, the eyes and ears for the municipality to look to make sure construction is implementing good BMPs, they're staying in compliance with their permit and our municipal ordinances. I don't enforce the construction general permit, I just enforce the city or county's municipal ordinances. But I also don't work for the construction operator, so I work for municipality. And I think a lot of us are municipalities here. Anyway, enough about that. So economic challenges, I saw a lot of that in this past year. And then also labor and staffing, a lot of new hires, even labor shortages. People were struggling to get contractors on site. An example was there's only one rock supplier that this contractor could get, and he got injured, and so he was out for 2 weeks, and he had nobody to bring rock out for for one of their BMPs. So things like that I saw, and a lot of new hires. Usually in the subcontracting world, it looked like there were just a lot of new people in the trades that just weren't familiar with stormwater BMPs. And we also had a really unique storm season where we had some really intense storms, especially in the Central Valley. We had severe flooding back in October. But we had less frequent storms. So you go longer without rain and people think, oh, I don't need to worry about stormwater BMPs, it's never going to rain. And then all of a sudden we're hit with these downpours, and it's just high rainfall intensity. but fewer and fewer storms. So this produced some interesting results. Well, one of the things I saw was just a lack of general BMP implementation and awareness. You might have the contractor going out and installing BMPs, but the subcontractors, they just have no clue. They don't know what it's there for. They don't know anything about it. And so there was just a general overall lack of awareness. And then that lack of awareness led to a lack of preparedness when storm events did come. So there was a breakdown in education somewhere, and me communicating problems to a superintendent or to a contractor, it wasn't going down to the general workers. And then I also saw there was a willingness from project owners and general contractors to comply. They wanted to, they were taking steps and doing what they could, but there was just a lack of follow through on the subcontractors. They would spend this money and get things put in place, and then they'd be destroyed the next day, and they were of no effect. So this also led to increased non-compliance, higher fines, and higher maintenance costs overall. So just an interesting year in general. And so what can we learn from this? Well, I'd like to try and take this, it's not so much a year of failures, but a year that we can learn from. So this workshop is geared for municipal inspectors, or maybe even QSP inspectors and general contractors, just to see what went wrong in BMP implementation on some of these jobs. And a couple of those mishaps was maybe it was the wrong tool for the job, or additional BMPs were needed, or maybe it was just a bad installation overall. And we're going to look at examples from each of the 5 BMP categories. So sediment, erosion, non-stormwater, good housekeeping, and run-on runoff controls. We're going to look at examples in each of those categories. We're going to identify, how things went wrong, what could have been done better, and how some non-compliant situations could have been avoided. And then also, just to refresh us, municipal inspectors, QSP inspectors, or general contractors, just refresh our eyes on identifying problems so that we know what to look for, out in the field. So without further ado, let's just talk about our first category, sediment controls. And this picture here, so I'm just going to be showing pictures and examples of this, and we'll be talking about this. So this picture here is from that October downpour where we had a lot of flooding. And so a lot of sites had failed BMPs during that time, but some sites were worse than others. There were definitely some that struggled more than others. And so this is one that struggled more than somebody else, because they really just didn't implement all the BMPs they needed to. And so here we see this is one lot, but this is one lot, and this was the story on almost all of their lots. Some were worse than others, but these were good pictures because it just kind of highlighted. So let's just talk through what we see here. We have fiber roll at the back of the curb, but what's happened to it? It's gotten crushed. It's kind of flattened, and now it's just a way for water to run off over it. And it looks like some sediment has pooled up on top of that fiber roll already, and it's just starting to run off the sidewalk. It's not raining right now in this picture, but what I want to highlight here is because of the lack of erosion control, there's just going to be increased erosion and sedimentation happening, especially since the perimeter controls have been, ruined already. This is like it wasn't even there now. It's just going to run off and run out into the street. So, not providing maintenance on the fiber roll, this is what I was talking about, that lack of awareness. Somebody just drove over it. It looks like it was freshly installed, but somebody didn't know what it was there for, and they just crushed it, drove over it. Not having erosion control on the lot also led to this just being eroded really quickly. And I want to just highlight here, where is the erosion coming from? It's not raining right now. I don't really see any signs of erosion, but where this erosion is coming from is from this downspout over here, draining water off, and now it's pooled up over here, and it's found a way to channel. Actually, it looks like it's kind of coming down over to the second fiber roll, a little higher up, and it's channeling right across that and over the other one. So you're having run on here from the roof, that has velocity and it's ponded water, and now that water has to go somewhere and it's running off the lot. Now, if there was another maybe velocity dissipation here, maybe a little check dam to slow the flow down and some erosion control, this situation wouldn't nearly be as bad. So this definitely could have been avoided quite easily. A few more BMPs would have just been put in place. Also, the fiber roll isn't really installed correctly. It's not actually keyed in. This grade this isn't trenched in at all. It's just laid flat on the back of the sidewalk here. So that's another reason why it was easily taken over. I'll show you a little close up here. You can see it doesn't look like a lot of sediment, but like I said before, this is just going to constantly be running off now that it's been overrun. And down on the other side of the lot, you can see definitely not keyed in here. It's just undermining right underneath that fiber roll. I don't even think this one is staked in. It really isn't doing anything but just causing channelization of the flow here. And the same thing at the top of the picture here, you can see water is just pooling up and it's just making its way down and eroding out underneath the perimeter control. So really, this situation could have been avoided. And you see there's not a lot of sediment in the street now, but it could have been avoided altogether if a few more BMPs like erosion control, proper installation, and education of what they're there for. You can see all this water here, all this exposed sediment, just a lot of area that it can erode from and cause problems. So what I was saying is that this lot was one of many. Here's another one. You can see a little bit more dramatic erosion. Fiber roll has gone completely. And here, let me blow this picture up a little bit. You can see there's no drain pipe, so it's just coming down straight off of the roof here, and it's causing a lot more erosion. You can see how much is settled out here and gone over into the street. So this was very common. Had a lot of issues on my inspections with this where, sediment controls would be installed, but no erosion controls were installed. They're either thinking I've heard a lot that sediment controls like fiber rolls are erosion controls, but that's just not true. Sediment controls are for sedimentation prevention, and erosion controls are preventing erosion. Erosion is that detachment of particles, right? So if there was a blanket here or straw or something, this erosion could have been prevented by just adding another little layer. Another common issue I saw was sediment controls just not being installed in the right place. What I saw happen a lot was, looking at a BMP plan, the perimeter controls might be shown to be installed in the right spot, and they, it might look good on the plan, but then the contractor might not even look at that plan, even though they're supposed to. And they hire the installer and they say, hey, just go install, out on the perimeter. And then the installer doesn't know exactly where they're supposed to. And so stuff like this happens where you have, a perimeter control installed, but then you have all this exposed soil on the other side of it. Now, another problem is that this isn't trenched in it as well, and it's not staked in. It's just kind of laid out here. So this is really going to cause more problems. You're going to have channelization, which is going to erode underneath it and just undermine it. And you have all this exposed soil here. So this was definitely me going back and telling him, hey, I'm sorry, you just installed this, but you didn't install it right. You need to take it out and redo it. And they did. They installed it on the right side of the fence. But this was also a typical thing where, plenty of stormwater plans spec out properly installed BMPs in proper locations, but it doesn't always get translated to the job right. So what needs to happen? Well, contractors need to have their plans communicated to them. And then we as inspectors, when we go out, say, hey, this isn't installed per your plan. You need to put it out where it was supposed to go. And they need to make sure they're following what their QSD called out for them. All right. So another sediment control is track out controls. And this is also from, I don't think this is from that October flooding. I think this is from that second big storm we had in November. It wasn't as big, but some sites, maybe they were able to handle the October rain. They didn't have much runoff. It soaked it all into the ground, but then it was in the ground. And so when they had more rain come, they still weren't quite prepared. So in this instance, the contractor was telling me on this job that the site is flat, it's not going to drain off to the street. We have a vegetated buffer around the project, and then we'll put out some fiber roll too, just to be safe. But we're not going to have a lot of runoff. We won't have any discharges. Well, when they had enough water, this is, I pulled up to the project, and this is what I see in the street. Muddy water going down the gutter, and this was definitely a non-compliance situation here. And so, my first question is, because I don't see it running off from the perimeter as I'm walking down, I came from over here, I walked down past the fence, I'm not seeing it run off from any of those spots. I come down, it's coming out from the entrance. So I walk in the project, and there's these pools of muddy water, right by the entrance. The rock hadn't been maintained. So there's, puddles of muddy water here and there from sediment that's on the track out control, and, right adjacent to it. And then turning around, you can see on the other side, big puddle of water. And so what I want to highlight here is, though, people might say, oh, it's a flat site, it's not going anywhere. We won't have erosion, we won't have runoff. Even on flat sites, we can have a lot of erosion, we can have ponded water, and that water will need to go somewhere. And typically the path of least resistance is out the entrance, right? Because that's the one that's sloping towards the street. So that's why, the CASCA standard TC1 specs out having a sediment control, like for perimeter control, along the entrance to prevent this type of thing from happening. Let's see, what could have been done to, prevent this much water coming off? Well, definitely erosion control, right? You wouldn't have had as much muddy water from here. But let's say that just wasn't, they're driving through here, they need to grade this or whatever, and they just didn't put out erosion control. Well, definitely having a few layers of sediment controls, like some check dams to, kind of settle out the water before it goes out the entrance, or at the very least, just redirect it back into the project. A lot more could have been done here than what was being done. And definitely anytime you have ponded water here, you don't want to leave water ponded up. You want it off your site. So definitely if they had just put in some erosion controls, and then some check dams, some sediment controls to just bleed off that water slowly, they wouldn't have had chocolate milk. I'll go back to that picture. They wouldn't have had chocolate milk going down the street. So another point in thinking is like, well, I just need to keep this water on my site. Well, no, you don't. You want to get it off your site. You don't want water staying on your site. And so we just need to make sure that we're getting it off the site clean within the, effluent limitations. So that's just another example of track out controls. The point I want to highlight there is if they're not properly built, if they're not properly stabilized, you're going to have runoff from them, and it's going to look bad. What about when it's not raining? They can still be an issue. And here's another example here. They maybe did have some fiber rolls. They're not really installed the greatest, but at least they're aware that they need to put something out. But there's still a lot of sediment on the street. You can see here, it's going down blocks. It's going down a long way. So what do we have here? Well, first thing is the soils. We have small particles on the site. So very fine particles that are getting attached to the tires. And second thing, I didn't have a better picture of the rock. The rock is too small. You might be able to see just the rock size here. It's already compacted. It's not knocking anything off the tires. So while it might be good to transition so that we're not taking dust over the curb, it might be a stabilization method. This is not really cleaning the tires at all. There's plenty of staining on the rock, and that's just, it was as much staining as if it would be on the street. So that's another failure I've seen, where people get too small a gauge of rock for knocking dust off their tires, and then it doesn't actually knock dust off of their tires. It just compacts, it flattens out, and then you just have all of this track out happening. So this is from their import-export. This is when they were doing a lot of hauling off their site, doing a lot of grading. So they needed to have a sweeper out here while this was going on so that this just didn't get, stuck into the sediment. But they did get this cleaned up after the next day after I came by and did the inspection. And the next day, this was all cleaned up. They were in compliance, but definitely this entrance, it was underspec. The rock wasn't the right size, and that's why they still had as much problems as they did. Another example is when, they just don't put anything at all. So this is similar soils. This fine powdery dirt, this is similar to what the other project was. And you can see just how much dirt gets kicked off and how many big particles. Let me go to this other photo here. How many big particles are here just settled in the street, over on the sidewalk. And you can imagine wind erosion is happening all the time as they're driving over this. And so a lot of this could just be wind erosion deposition. It could be just general tracking, but this happened a lot on some of these projects. And what happens is, here, I'll go over to my next picture. A lot of these small curb transitions, if there's no defined access point in the SWIP, there's no oversight, people are just going to access wherever is easiest for them. And so what I saw a lot was on projects that may be large grading projects and the superintendent or the owner isn't out there providing any oversight, people will just drive up and over wherever they want, and it just causes all these small track out points. But now when it rains, they'll have highly compacted soils, there'll be no perimeter control, and this will just be a point of erosion just going right out. And that leads to this. You can tell this is water put this here. You can see the signs of water just depositing all this sediment, but you get drains that are impacted with sediment, just packed in. And this is all from track out, from wind and wind deposition and track out. And then water carried it over into the drain inlet. And so, another sediment control that I'm talking about is drain inlet protection. And if you guys know your CASCA specs, this is not really an approved spec. This is usually what people do, right? You have one rock bag on the left, one rock bag on the right, maybe something over the middle, and we call it good. Well, it does stop a lot, but it does also let a lot through. Here's another picture here. You can see how much was stopped on the one side, but it's still like this rock bag isn't flush against the curb. There's still stuff siphoning through and down into the drain inlet. Got other pictures here of drains just being socked in, filled with sediment, and the water can move these bags, and it looks like these had been moved to let the water drain off. Again, another item here noting that people probably just weren't aware why they were there, and or maybe they just didn't care. So I do have a good BMP implementation. This is what good drain inlet protection is supposed to look like. You have this little berm and this little dam so that water can come through, it can settle out and then flow over or around it. But this is good. This site had a lot of problems. I'll be showing quite a few examples from this project. They had a lot of problems on their BMP implementation, but the one thing they did right was their drain inlet protection. This is good protection here. And again, just for when it's raining, they'll have water coming down. It can pond up here, settle out, and then flow over, and then into the drain inlet. So this is why it's a last-ditch effort. This is what I like to call like the finisher, the polisher. If you have good erosion controls, you won't have much sediment detaching. If you have good perimeter controls, you won't have as much eroded material leaving your site. It'll have a chance to settle out before it leaves the site. And then if you have good drain inlet protection, you'll have good clean water going out of your project when it flows over. All right, that's enough sediment control. Let's talk about some erosion control. There was a distinct lack of it that I noticed on some projects. And here's just a classic example of, grading is done and then the project sits and no erosion control has been put on. And then we have rain and And look what happens. You know, a flat, compacted lot, no erosion control. And now we have water coming off the flat lot. It's eroded out the small slope that they've made here. And you can see it's overrun the perimeter controls. And this is all mud. Everything you see here, I mean, this little bit here on the sidewalk is clean, but the rest of it is all mud. And, you know, this didn't really go anywhere, but it definitely eroded and it's definitely not in compliance. But this is a huge problem that could have been completely avoided if erosion controls had been implemented. And to prove my point, here's a picture where good erosion controls and perimeter controls were put in place. I do have some good examples. You can see here just how clean, I mean, there's a little bit of mud here and there, but this was after both the October and November rains, and the streets look clean. I mean, they've done their sweeping too, but the streets look clean, and that's largely due to the good erosion control implementation. Here's another picture just showing, you know, we have that same problem on those first projects I showed. You have water coming off the roof. It just runs and hits the ground. But look, there's no sediment going over the sidewalk. There's nothing in the street. And that's not because they just cleaned it up. That's because nothing eroded. It soaked into the ground. It didn't erode. Maybe there's a little erosion happening under the fabric, but it really, really helped out. And so even where they were doing other phases of construction, BMPs have been out a little bit longer. Still, nothing in the street. The street is clean. This was really, really good case example of why erosion and perimeter controls are successful, because they didn't have any maintenance to do after two of the largest storms of the year. Now, they have a site neighboring next door that didn't put in those same levels of erosion control. And so we see, I literally go 2 streets over, and here we go. We have new fibrils put in place. Some preserved existing vegetation, but they've done some grading, and what they thought was active before the storm turned into signs of erosion. And you have tracking here, you have mud in the gutter, not a lot, but you know, it's still some, and it looks like you're having some signs of erosion on this lot. Here's another one with that same gutter problem, and look, you just have this huge channel, you know, deposited flow, sediment on the sidewalk underneath the fibrils. They already look inundated and like they need to be replaced. Here's some older ones that have been, you know, not maintained well. They're not trenched in. You can see sediment has flowed off the curb. It might be hard to see, but it has flowed right off the curb underneath the fiber roll. And there's at least 4 or 5 spots of erosion, people driving up onto the lot and causing some mud. So this is right next door. The only thing that changed was no erosion controls. Here's another example of that. And this is what it leads to. It leads to mud in the gutters, leaving down to the polishing BMPs, and it just flow right past that and into the drain inlet. So I did also have, from all the rain we had, I do have some really, I mean, I think they're really beautiful pictures of erosion, but just dramatic pictures of erosion that I wanted to share with you guys. So this is, this was a trench, a utility trench, had a lot of rain happen, and sandy soils caused a lot of erosion here. I mean, you could see, almost looks like a miniature Bryce Canyon or something, or Zion, with these eroded structures here. And it just backfilled the trench from not having it stabilized or just scheduling. They did their grading in the winter when you know, storms were coming up, and just not implementing the scheduling BMP. Here's another example of that. This trench was supposed to be open, but now it's completely backfilled. You see this pipe here? This is completely buried now, and they have to re-excavate this whole trench here. And also, like these side slopes, they are not stable at all because of how much material has been eroded off of that. So to get any equipment in here, it's going to just turn into a disaster because of no erosion controls. I mean, they put out some plastic on the stockpiles, but that probably, I mean, you can see here, there's more erosion than on the other side because it was just running off the plastic. So definitely, if they had erosion controls down on this side, I mean, even just, threw straw out here, right? Probably would have saved them a lot of hassle in having to regrade and re-excavate these trenches. So here's some, I just wanted to share these pictures because this just shows the power of erosion, and the power of scheduling, like not doing, if you can avoid doing grading in the winter when these big dramatic storms come up, do it, because here's just, all of this has to be regraded. It was all finished. Now all of it has to be regraded. And I like this picture because I want to highlight where the erosion is coming from. You can see there's one curb here, or rough form of a curb. On the other side, you still have erosion, not as dramatic as on this side, right? And where all of this erosion is coming from, as you can see, it's all following the tire tracks. This, dozer left this big track mark here, and that just started the channel for water to erode out underneath. And it eroded out this whole slope. And now all of that has to be regraded once it dried out. So nothing much to say here other than, just showing examples of how a little bit of rain can erode a lot of soil. Even when it's not raining, you can have non-stormwater discharges causing quite a bit of erosion. I'm not really too sure what happened here. They hadn't replaced any of their fiber rolls yet. They hadn't put in any erosion controls. And for whatever reason, there was somebody, either they were like testing a line, or it looks like, yeah, I see a comment here, it looks like concrete washout. I'm not really sure what happened here, but there was some type of water being used, and this eroded all this sediment out of the driveway. And that driveway now has to be regraded, but also that sediment went into the street and it, discharged the project. And this was from the middle of summer. So erosion controls are needed year round, but also non-stormwater controls, as we'll talk about in a little bit here. But that's just one form of erosion. Another one is wind. And where we work in the Central Valley, we can have a lot of breezes come up in the end of the day, the delta breeze we call it, and it'll blow through the agricultural areas where a lot of new construction is happening on the perimeter of these agricultural areas. So wind blows through there, and then if you have large, flat, compacted areas, you're getting a lot of wind erosion. So I just wanted to show these pictures because this, all of here, this is all just deposited sediment from wind erosion. You can see it deposited here on the fiber roll and then in the street. All that's just deposited wind erosion. And just going down this whole stretch. And that was like it throughout all the projects, all the streets on this project. On every curb, you could see one side was clean, one side was dirty. One side would be clean, one side would be dirty. And it would just go back and forth. And that's just that wind erosion depositing out and depositing, settling out on their project. But that's how much dirt was getting picked up just from a breeze blowing through that area. So having a tackifier, having some wind erosion control down, or just erosion control, would have removed this sediment from happening. And again, this picture is in the middle of summer. This is when people think, oh, we don't need any BMPs. Well, yes, you do. Wind erosion, just erosion control for inactive areas. That's why they are required. So this doesn't happen. All right, enough about that. Let's talk about run-on, runoff controls. Now, when I started working as a QSP, we would always get to this category in our trainings saying you need to have perimeter controls, sediment controls, erosion controls, and then run-on, runoff controls. And I always thought, isn't that just those first two categories combined? Like, I don't understand why this needs to be its own category. Well, there was a project that happened this year that really clearly showed me why this is a critical BMP category. Goes beyond just erosion, goes beyond just perimeter controls. This is really its own thing, and let me show you guys why. So this project was originally just supposed to be doing clearing and grubbing. They were just going to do some removing of existing vegetation. They were close to getting their grading permit, but they went on and just decided, you know what, we got an at-risk grading permit. We're just gonna do all of our cut and fill right now. And so, you know, I didn't even realize they had their grading permit, and I drove by there and I saw they were doing some dirt moving. So I stopped to do my inspection, and I come around the side and I see this huge cut. And I know the perspective here. I think I can zoom in. Let's see, I can zoom in a little bit there for you guys. This is a huge cut here. And I know the picture probably doesn't do it justice, but this is about 4 to 5 feet. This is a cut of 4 to 5 feet deep. I'm 6'6", and I felt tiny in this huge cut. I didn't really stay down there too long because I didn't want to get run over, but they cut out this huge slope, and I had no idea what the extent of their grading was. There wasn't any, you know, site superintendent to talk to, just a couple of workers in the machines, and they were doing all this cut and fill. And so I went out a couple days later, and this is how much they had done. They excavated that 4 to 5 feet out, the entire 10 acres. 10 acres. They took out a lot of dirt. But then they left this slope here. So this is, you know, a drop of about 4 feet, 3 to 4 feet in most places, sometimes a little higher. And bare soil, which used to kind of just end here, you know, it wasn't that dramatic of a slope, but now, you know, it is a dramatic slope. And so I was asking them, hey, you need to have run-on runoff controls. You need to have something at the top of that slope to stop water from running into your project. They're like, what are you talking about? We don't need to do that. And so I looked at their SWIP. It wasn't called out in their SWIP. It was actually a deficient map because they only had it for one phase of construction. They only had it for their vertical phase of construction, not for their grading phase. So none of the slopes that they were grading or you know, creating on their project were spec'd out on their site map. So their QSD didn't have anything. And so I told them, hey, you need to talk to your QSD. You need to get run-on runoff controls because that slope is going to cause erosion on your site. And I'll show you, it wasn't as terrible as it could have been. This is just showing again, you know, I'm holding that picture about up to my, you know, my head, and this is just 4-foot drop, you know, but it did have erosion. You can see all of these little rills forming at the top, and it looks like even tire tracks up here, just regular, you know, channels of erosion, sporadic vegetation. So, you know, you're just having more channelized flow in these areas. And this is what it turned to. That's that same side, you know, now that cut is deepening and it's gone all the way down that slope, all the way down that slope. You can see all that sediment deposited here on the compacted surface. And this is a little bit farther down the hillside. This is all staining. You can see the different kind of, you know, striations in the soil. That's all the clay staining on the soil as it's eroding up off the top. You can see these rills here from the vegetation being removed. And let's see, where's the next picture here? Yeah, some more deposition. Some of this isn't erosion, but here's the close-up of that I want to show. Look at that erosion, right? All that staining there, you know, you can see the hard clay, but this is all just coming from the top of it. So it might look like a lot, but if they had a run-on runoff control, if they diverted the water from not running off the slope, it wouldn't have been nearly as bad. You know, and combine that with if they'd sprayed this, if they had put an erosion control on, this wouldn't have been eroding as bad as it did. I mean, that one picture, that cut was going all the way through the slope. It had cut all the way through the slope, down to the bottom of that. So, you know, where was this leading to? Well, this is that end of that hill, and this leads to another neighboring facility. This is a low spot in the fence, you know, and it's a little bit high over here. And so you have two areas, large areas of exposed soil that come together. I'll show you the flip side of it. You can see just how high up we are. They'll all come down that little channel, and it'll go right off into this neighboring facility down over here. And so I was telling them, you need perimeter controls on this fence, you need erosion controls, run-on runoff controls, and it laid like this for a long time. This was a difficult project to work on. And so walking down even farther on the job, I come to this on the backside. Well, this whole area had been, this used to be completely vegetated, but they took all the vegetation off, and they left this large area of exposed soil with no perimeter controls. This is all just running off. Part of this, their property line is somewhere like at the end of this fence. So part of this was already, looking like disturbed soil, but it just eroded off here. So definitely having erosion or run-on runoff controls here to check the flow coming down the hill and settling it out, and then having a perimeter control down here, but there was nothing. There's absolutely nothing. And you also notice track walking is in the wrong direction. So there's vehicle tracks here, which could act as a erosion control, but this is just, it worsened the erosion. So I'll show you what they did do. They did install some BMPs, and this is like a week after they had installed it. They put silt fence down here. Silt fence fell down, and they put fiber rolls out, but they didn't stake them in. They just laid them out. They didn't even bother to trench them in. Here's another picture of it. They're not even butted up. They're just literally thrown out there. I'd never seen a BMP implementation this bad before. And this is going to fail. This is just going to cause more channelization of flow. It's going to worsen erosion. The contractor did this. They didn't have their QSD involved. They just went out and they heard, oh, we need to put something out there. So this is what they did. So this was not to any spec. They just went and took the initiative and did this. And so again, middle of winter is when all this is happening. This is like November, December time. Here's a picture of that silt fence, just showing how dramatic that slope is, and definitely needed erosion control here. But this wasn't even at the toe of the slope. This was up on the slope, partially, not even on the flat part. Here's another picture showing the other side. And then this is kind of the corner of the fence, really able to run off there. Nothing holding those BMPs in. They're not doing anything. This again just shows the slope. No erosion controls, no perimeter controls, just lack of knowledge and awareness completely. So this was one of the hardest projects I had to work on, and yeah, I won't say too much more about that. Anyway, so run-on runoff controls, if they had managed their run-on, they wouldn't have had as much erosion. If they had put erosion controls in, again, wouldn't have had as much as erosion. And then if they'd managed their runoff, managing those runoff points, but they just wanted to do their grading. They didn't care about the weather. They just get in, get the job done. So lack of awareness or care. So non-stormwater controls, I am kind of running out of time, so I'm going to move through this a little bit quickly. This here, this is non-stormwater because, let me explain the situation here. So they have track out happening on this project, coming through this entrance, and then water truck is filling up here behind this truck. There's a fire hydrant. They're filling, fire hydrant's over on the other side of the truck. They're filling up and they're spilling water everywhere, and it's just going straight to the DI. Non-stormwater discharge that could have been completely avoided if sweeping had happened. They could have gotten this water off without it, picking up dirt. But this is just kind of an unfortunate situation. The driver's just going out into the street, causing track out, and then that water is just picking up sediment and taking it right into the drain inlet. So saw that a couple of times, and more commonly we saw new landscaping would either have a leak or it would flood, and then the lot next to it wouldn't have any landscaping. This is all just nuisance flow. This is either a leak or something that didn't get put on right, and so it's just, or overwatering because it's new irrigation or new landscaping, and it's just taking all this sediment and just running off with it. So normally it would be, an allowable discharge if it's clean, but because it's carrying all the sediment with it, I mean, you can see here, it's just constantly draining off. So this, again, another non-compliance area, picking up pollutants with it and just flowing down the street. Another example was just, this was good housekeeping that turned into, or bad housekeeping that turned into a stormwater discharge. One of the worst I'd ever seen. This puddle was a stabilized concrete washout. That was full and still had water in it. The grader needed to come in here and do some work. So they were like, oh, I'll just move that concrete washout. Well, the plastic tore as they tried to move it, dumped all this water onto the lot, but it also dumped it into the street. And you can see maybe this white staining here. Here's another close-up picture. White staining that led right into the drain inlet here. And superintendent and I popped the lid, and this is what we found. This sheen here is just more of that concrete washout. And so we went up the stormwater trunk to look how far it went. You could see here the mud and concrete and how nasty this water looks. And it went on for about 500 feet. 500 feet. So this contractor actually did the right thing. They went and they got a sump pump and they pumped out the water. We actually took samples. I took pH samples of that water they sumped out of the drain. The pH was 12, had a pH of 12 in that drain. So we knew it was concrete washout. And this actually turned to them having to vac out the storm line because they had a storm coming in the next couple of days. So they had to call a vac truck out, and they had to vac out about 500 feet of storm drain lines because somebody tried to move the concrete washout before it was ready, and it was too full probably, and it broke. So again, education, why that B&P is there, or maybe having that in a better location so it doesn't need to be moved, maybe not overfilling it. And it was just another avoidable situation if a little bit of education and better implementation happened. But this was a very, very, very costly response, several $1,000s that happened here from one person's error. Another thing that happened was a lot of saw cutting slurry that just would not get cleaned up. So this was, this is all from saw cutting, straight in the street. And this is all just slurry that got deposited in the street. I saw a lot of this. And what we normally need to see happen is, it gets vacuumed up or it gets contained. Some of them, they make saws that will actually have vacuums, and it'll try to contain as much of the water as it can. But what I saw a lot of times happen is as people were either grinding down concrete, or as they were just vacuuming stuff up, they would just dump the water. When they vacuumed it up, they would dump it on the dirt and completely defeating the purpose of it. So again, another lack of awareness, lack of understanding why B&P is there, and another non-compliant situation that could have been avoided. All right, I'm going to quickly breeze through this because I want to get to the last section. This is our last thing here. This is a lot of washout problems that I've seen, but this is good housekeeping because it's not actually being discharged, it's just on the ground. And so with these pictures, the contractor told me, oh, we are washing out where we pour. Well, I looked through the job and there was probably about 10 of these instances where they did not wash out where they were pouring. And I actually saw the truck, he pulled away and he started washing out. I went over to him, I was like, hey, you can't do that. You need to wash out and keep it in your truck, or you need to keep it in a washout, or do it back at your facility. He's like, oh, no, we're just washing out where we pour. And I showed him the pictures. I'm like, no, you're not. It's just going everywhere. And so it was just, the guy stopped and he knew what he was supposed to be doing. He was like, yeah, you're right. We have to do that. I was like, yeah, so could you please do that? And so he got back in his truck and he drove off. And that was one of 50 drivers that they had on there. But again, no superintendent, nobody was watching over them. They're just workers doing their job, and they're not implementing the B&Ps that they need to. So a little bit of oversight, a little bit of watching them probably could have been avoided. I'll quickly just go through these. Washout was probably my biggest non-compliance from all different trades. Stucco, paint, all kinds of stuff. I saw this, you'd have a washout provided, they'd wash out in front of it. Or this is from that back of that same house that I just showed you. They'd wash out behind the house or on the side of the house. This here's concrete washout. They ground the pad down and then they dumped this right in front of it. You know, they poured the pad and they kept it clean, but then they do some grinding, they smooth it out, and they use a vacuum to keep that water and dust down, and then they dump it out right in front of the lot. Not allowed. This is stucco, sorry, it's a little bit of a bad picture, but stucco washout, you know, just sloughing off the plastic here. I'm not quite sure what this is, if this is paint or taping mud, but this is running down from a hose spigot down into the street underneath the fiber roll. Large areas like this behind the house, you know, just I saw this on too many jobs, or a washout that was just undersized and it spilled, or when they moved it, it just split. And, you know, this is a smaller version of the other picture I showed you. Here again, this is just taping mud that was just dumped out behind the house, and it's just leaving a mess everywhere. Same thing, this is taping mud here too. Taping mud and stucco, just all washing out in the same area. And similar over here. And this is paint. And contractor actually told me, oh, don't worry, that's water-based paint. I'm like, I don't care, it's paint. Doesn't matter if it's water-based or oil-based or what base. It's not allowed to be washed out on the ground. And this was probably one of the biggest washouts I saw on the ground, just because so many people were doing it. And this project, the guy told me, oh, don't worry about it. It's, you know, I think you're just seeing mud everywhere. It's just the color of the mud. I'm like, this is not mud. This is your guys are washing out, because I see them do it. And I see their buckets on the ground too. So that was a very, very common issue. Could have been avoided with a little bit of education. Another thing I saw a lot, just trash piles. This may have been from illegal dumping. Saw a lot of that. I saw a lot of homeowners who would use trash cans in subdivisions, and they would dump stuff. Somebody actually had a fire in their dumpster because somebody put a whole barbecue with live coals in the dumpster and caught it on fire. When the garbage truck picked it up, the whole garbage truck caught on fire on their subdivision. But more commonly, what happened was little bits and pieces of trash just everywhere that can get picked up by wind. This is just bad housekeeping, overflowing dumpsters. So these need to be cleaned out. But again, going back to our supply and demand, they couldn't get their waste haulers to come out on a more frequent rotation. And their waste bins would get filled up with homeowners doing projects or just dumping stuff because they're like, oh, they're here, I might as well use it. And they get overfilled, they can't use it for what it's needed to. And so it just spills out, it's on the side of it, it's everywhere. So again, sometimes the challenges aren't incompetence, it's just, you know, they can't get waste picked up, they can't contain it properly, there's just too much of it. But you know, not picking up all the little trash, not carrying, now it's in the street, now it's on the curb, just gets everywhere, you know. Little bits and pieces of plastic, or just, this is a good example of bad housekeeping. You know, there could have easily been a dumpster here where all of this went into the dumpster, right? Or, you know, just piles of it. Maybe they're keeping it off the ground, but it's just going everywhere and it's not regularly picked up. Or a drain inlet, or I'm sorry, a dumpster in the street, you know, just overfilled. And this can't put the lid on it, can't easily cover it. And if it rained, it would just leak right out the bottom. So overflowing dumpsters was a huge issue. And most of the time I would talk, hey, you need to get your dumpsters cleared out. And they would say, hey, I know, I want to. Trust me, I don't want to have my, you know, my project looking like trash. But they just couldn't get it picked up on a regular basis. So those are our 5 categories. And to finish off the day, I'm going to just have a quick little humorous segment. This is my fiber roll Hall of Fame. I got my top 5 installations of fiber rolls that took on new professions. So let me show you these. This is number 5. Call this the nonconformist. You know, he doesn't want to be installed in the typical J-hook pattern. He doesn't want to be even butted up together. He wants to go on top. He wants to be the top dog. So This is the nonconformist over here, number 5. Number 4, the escape artist, putting it out in the street. He's just trying to get away and try living life on the other side of the sidewalk. Number 3, got the tree hugger here. Just trying a little bit something different. They wanted to take out this tree. This 5-year-old said, nope, I'm not having it. This tree is staying. Whatever you do, you're not taking this guy out. So number 3, the tree hugger. Number 2, the charbroiled, the self-igniter. Yeah, the one that kind of blew up. He didn't get very far in life. And number 1, drum roll please, the up-and-comer. The up-and-comer here. Yeah, he tried something different. Instead of being flat out on the ground, he thought, why not move up? I'll just try going up for a change, All of these were actual installations. Yeah, they're not doing much, I'll say that. So with that, thanks for taking a look back at some of these examples. Hopefully you learned something on how not to do stuff and some ways that we could have improved just by a little bit better education, a little bit better implementation of BMPs. Any questions, feel free, you can put it in the chat, or if you want to just unmute yourself, go ahead and ask. But with that, let's see. Any questions, Rebecca?
I don't believe there's any questions, but
see,
those fiber rolls were awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I do see Mel had a comment here. I often see people washing tools and boots being washed out after concrete poured directly into storm drains. They are stopped if we catch them. That's a good point, if we catch them. Some night projects, we find the staining going into the drains. Yep, I see that as well. Any other questions? Any other comments?
While we wait for those to come in, if you missed any portion of this workshop, you can find the recording up on our website, which is stormwaterawareness.org, in about 24 to 48 hours, as well as all the other workshops. So we hope you guys can check those out and enjoy the rest of Stormwater Awareness Week. But thank you, Jonah, for presenting today, and thank you everyone for attending. It's been an awesome week.
Yes, thank you guys. Thank you for being a part of Stormwater Awareness Week. And if there's nothing else, then we'll just sign off and say see you next year.